Good afternoon. March 17th meeting, the Oklahoma City Water Utilities Trust will be in order. First item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the previous meeting.
Will we approve the minutes?
Motion and a second to approve the minutes for March 3rd. Are there questions or comments concerning those minutes? Hearing none, voting please. Minutes are approved. Next item is the consent docket.
Move approval subject to individual consideration.
Mr. Chairman. Second.
Are there matters to be discussed separately? I see marks on your copy of the agenda. There must be.
I'm sorry for interrupting. Mr. Chairman, I would request that item 3A be stricken so we can bring it back at the next meeting. We would like to bring that back with a resolution that would better explain to the trustees how that contract operates.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to strike item 3A, which is the first item on the consent docket. Voting, please. That item stricken. Are there other matters?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for approval of the consent docket. I do want to point out that we're accepting the Baxter Flying Field improvements today, making progress on the North Lake Staley Draper Drive project by approving an increase in that cost to extend the road a little ways. And notably, we're approving what looks like a fairly simple gas relocation with an easement, but what that does for us is make room for our new larger pump station at the Draper plant, which will help us push more water out of that plant. We're very excited about that.
Any other comments on the consent docket? Hearing none, voting please. Consent docket's approved. Next item, concurrence docket.
Move the concurrence docket.
Second.
Motion and a second on the concurrence docket. Are there items to be discussed separately?
It's good to note that all three of them, none of the three have outlet funds attached to them.
Further comments? Hearing none, voting please. Concurrence docket's approved. Next item, item 5, items for individual consideration. The first item is a resolution approving the debt management policy.
So, Mr. Chairman and trustees, because the Water Trust has not seen this item previously, Brett Weingart will give you a brief presentation. Staff, the Water Trust staff has been intimately involved in development of the new policy. Input from all the trusts was taken in serious consideration, and many adjustments were made to make certain this works for both trusts, for Aqua and the other trusts, as well as the general fund. We do heartily recommend its approval, but if you don't mind, Brett will give you some of the details.
Good afternoon, trustees. To the overview slide. So this policy was, as Marcia said, is adopted by Council on February 3rd, was recommended to be adopted by trusts, and the guidance the policy provides is general debt management practices that we perform on a daily basis, structure and term of indebtedness, so how long the debt is, how much we pay each year during the term, short-term debt, interim financing. We deal with some of that with commercial paper and SRF funds. Selection of finance consultants and service providers, like when we have the PFM and bond counsel, payment agents and our letter of credit provider for our commercial paper. Method of sale, refunding, credit ratings that we get from S&Ps and Moody's, continuing disclosure, compliance upon indenture covenants. Next slide. General debt management focuses on the use of the debt. There are some limitations concerning how we would use monies that come from debt financing. Generally, if it's capitalizable under our city accounting rules, we can use it. We can use debt funds for it, but we oftentimes restrict it further than that, largely for the capital improvements where we award the project, and sometimes for engineering associated with it, for inspection associated with it, things like that. But we usually don't use it to pay employee salaries. Pay-as-you-go funding, we have a very strong focus for many years of having somewhat of a 60% debt funding, 40% pay-as-you-go. This policy provides that we would continue with a pay-as-you-go blending strategy as we have had. The plan focuses on performing capital plans and financial plans before you start a borrowing program, so that you have a plan before you borrow. Appoint specific staff to manage the debt program, which we have. Billy Little sitting right there working with the PowerPoint today, oversees our debt plan. City will appoint a debt coordinator, as the city will have in their plan to oversee all the debt for the city. Debt limits, revenue secured debt limits, the part that focuses on us, financial plan feasibility determined in advance, and these other matters. I won't read each one, but what they really focus on is incorporating a financial prudence approach into the planning, so that we would be prudently incurring debt, not just going out and borrowing money. Next slide. Debt structure and term. Complying with state law. The law has limits concerning how we can borrow money, how much we can borrow. The interest rates we pay, we would follow those rules. Matching the economic life to the assets. So we would, if we're going to have a 30-year financing, we would use that 30-year financing for assets that would last 30 years or longer. And sometimes if we have a blend of assets, of shorter-lived assets and longer-lived assets, we structure the repayment term, the principal repayment, to match the life of the various assets being financed. Limits on extending the term for refinancing. Oftentimes, if we do refinancings, we don't usually extend the term of that debt, and if we blend that debt with new issues, then the structure would accommodate a 30-year repayment for the new debt and a shorter-term payment for the refinanced debt, blended into the refinancing. No balloon or loaded-in structure payments, but it also provides for wraparound payments to existing debt structures. That applies to Aquit because we have some of the larger debts that were incurred, like the 86C bonds is $10 million a year, and the McGee Creek bonds is $6.65 million a year. They will pay off soon, and at the end of that term for each of those, there's a big decrease in debt, and so our new debt has been structured to fit within the confines of that structure that we already have. Variable long-term debt discouraged. The only variable debt that Aquit has is when we temporarily finance with SRF funds and when we use our commercial paper. And they have all been very favorable, and interest rates less than 1% to us. If we got into a market where that was highly variable, then we would be bringing back some approaches to consider controlling that so we didn't have exposure. Subordinate lien financing is provided for. We have been looking with PFM's assistance as to whether we should use subordinate debt for some financings. As an example, SRF financing is subordinate to Aquit financing. McGee Creek debt is subordinate to Aquit financing today. So we do those from time to time. Finance consultants and providers, formal solicitation selection process. Aquit has had a long history of doing that and will continue to do so. For bond counsel, underwriter, financial advisor, we've used solicitation, formal solicitations, RP processes and such for selection. Other service providers like disclosure counsel have been a subcontract to bond counsel historically. Paying agent, escrow, and trustee bank, we've all done formal solicitations on those. Printing a lot of times is done through PFM or through the bond underwriters. Next slide. Method of sale. Each time we go out for an issue, we consider whether we should use competitive or negotiated sale. In the market that we've had recently, we've been using more negotiated sales because of the market that we're in. We focus on what's the best benefit to the trust and the ratepayers. We haven't done any private placement, but that's available. On refunding, per legal allowances, net present value savings of 3% or more. Oftentimes, our net present values approach 5, 6, 7%. We've never had one that's below 3% 21 years I've been here. Current versus advanced refunding analysis, we would look at that in the refunding. There have been times when we did advance refundings because there was savings were so significant. Restructuring only to benefit trust, not increase cost. We haven't been in a situation where we had to restructure debt to reduce payments due to financial situations. Credit ratings, who we would go to for credit ratings has been fairly static. We go to Moody's and S&P. There are other rating agencies, but so far that's the two we've been using. Credit rating agencies used by prospective bond purchasers for selection, so that becomes a matter, once you start going to one, then you usually stick with it. Only pursue issuances with investment grade ratings. We've, of course, had AAA ratings. Credit enhancements allowed were cost effective. At one time, Aqua would buy insurance to enhance its credit from AA plus or AA to AAA, but those have not been determined cost effective, and there are not very many available anymore that are cost effective. Next slide, continuing disclosure. Continuing disclosure really gets into the biggest issue that goes with this, and that has to do with when an official statement is offered to potential investors and they buy the bonds, they want to have regular information from us so they have an understanding of our financial status and if they're going to get repaid their bonds. And so we have an agreement of providing similar information that was in the official statement on a regular annual basis. That activity is performed in the city's finance department in the accounting group as they publish the comprehensive annual financial statement. So it remains somewhat static, and we just keep providing the same information every year through that process. If we were to have some sort of issue come up where we didn't make a bond payment on time or had to withdraw reserves, we would need to provide at that time an additional piece of information to the disclosure agency that we've contracted with to provide to bondholders. There's penalties for misrepresentation, and the focus is on record keeping, a lot of focus on record keeping. Next slide. Bond covenant compliance, not something that we talk about on a regular basis, but back in 1987 when the trustees borrowed their original issues with the amendment restated indenture, they entered into a contract with the bond purchasers to comply with certain requirements in the bond indenture. And so the utility staff, the municipal counselor's office, the bond counsel, and our financial advisor, and the trustee bank work together as a team to make sure that we comply with the requirements in that general bond indenture. And the policy provides that we would continue to do that. Next slide. In summary, we recommend that the trustees adopt the policy. The general manager will appoint staff to implement and maintain compliance. As I said earlier, procedures are already in place. We've been doing this for many years. Should there be any issue of concern that would require us to provide disclosure to bondholders, we of course would bring that information to trustees as well. And we rely on bond counsel and financial advisors should any issues come up that we would need to provide information to you in the future.
Mr. Chairman, I would move approval.
I have a question. It would seem to me that it might be worth considering adding in the policies that everything else being equal, local personnel might be chosen to handle these various jobs. I'm not sure if that's something that has been considered, but it just seems like that they're the ones who are employing people locally, paying taxes locally, and if we bring someone in from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, it would not be as good for the city as long as everything was equal. I don't know how you put that in there, but that's just a thought.
You could make a motion to add that to the policy, or we could bring that back as a separate resolution and a directive.
Why don't you bring it back to a separate resolution so we can vet it properly?
clerk advises me that there's nothing on the docket to approve, or it's not on for adoption.
Oh,
So,
okay.
but your point's well taken. I made a similar point a couple of weeks ago with regard to the expenditures of bond funds on all the projects, and really got a very nice report that we do a very good job of that, matter of fact.
That's great if we do. It just occurs to me that would be something to consider.
But it is certainly something we could consider.
So it's the resolution, we're adopting the resolution, but it's not a binding policy?
Yeah, no, Francis was on the wrong item.
Okay.
It is actually a resolution, but I agree with Carl that I think it's a good idea, but let's bring it back as a resolution.
Can we take a moment of silence to acknowledge the fact that the clerk has made an error? First one ever. I have been here 30 years, and I've never had that happen once. We need to record this day. That's the first time that's ever happened. If you were a Major League Baseball player, you'd be in the Hall of Fame. But, well, then, given the fact there is a resolution, then should we go ahead and accept it as an amendment, or does anyone have any further thoughts about it?
Go, Craig.
I believe that it might be advisable to have the recommendation by Trustee Edwards to be a separate resolution. That way, this document will match up with all the other city documents and policies, and there won't be that discrepancy, and it can be a standalone resolution.
I started to say we've approved similar resolutions this morning for everybody, all the...
That's fine.
It's been approved by half dozen trusts so far, but that, we can still bring Carl's resolution back.
Absolutely.
Could that, procedurally, could we vote on this and then do another resolution today? Okay. Why don't we then just vote on this on vice council, and then, anybody have any further questions about it? The resolution is approved.
Second.
Yeah. Now, we need to frame that, your comment into something we could...
I think staff has direction to bring back resolution.
Okay.
Yeah.
They can bring it back next time, and we can, we might want to look at that concerning all the other trusts, too, because that wasn't raised today, and it was approved like 3 or 4 different trusts today.
And there's quite a few positions in there that could be beneficial to the local
No doubt about it.
business community.
Okay, we'll do that. The next item is we do not need executive session, I understand.
Move to
Right?
strike?
Second.
Motion and a second to strike. Matter stricken. Next matter is items from trustees. Anybody? Hearing none. Next item is the general manager's reports, and the first is report and presentation on the sewer winter period consumption base.
Mr. Chairman, trustees, Alan McDonald, our Utilities Customer Services Superintendent, is here to tell you about the sewer winter period consumption base. We normally call that winter period average. It applies to single-family residences. We have some interesting news about that calculation this year. Alan?
Good afternoon. In February of 2012, the City Council adopted an ordinance amending Chapter 47 of the Municipal Code pertaining to winter period average. It fixed the calculation period from December through February, except in cases necessitating inclusion of March. And really the only reason we would do that is if we had inclement weather, couldn't read meters, snow, ice, for whatever reason. Then we would get into March to use that month in the winter period average. A recent evaluation of single-family residences shows that the changing the number of months for calculating the winter period average remains successful. The average residential winter period average base has been 5,000 gallons for the last 3 years and will remain that this year. Although you can see we are trending down, which is certainly a good thing. I think in those months people are probably not watering their yards as much or whatever, there's no growth, but we are in a trend downward. The new sewer winter period average starts April 1st of each year. And I do want to note that that October or 2011 consumption includes includes October's consumption. So that's why you see that a little bit elevated, because we got into some sprinkler issues, I believe, in that time. And the change is lessen the degree of variation that could occur, improving customer satisfaction. The analysis shows that a total of 53,151 accounts have a new winter period average that's lower than their current. And 37,093 accounts have an average that's higher than their current base. So as you can see by the chart there, we are certainly trending downward. We do have a few more that are the same, but in the most part, we're on a downward trend.
What kind of customer would have a 0 WPA?
It would be someone who maybe lives alone. You have to hit 1,000 gallons for it to register. So someone who lives alone, and the more I see, we have a few snowbirds in the city that leave during the winter. But.
Thank you.
And for a new customer that doesn't have a winter period average brought over from another household, that starts at 7,000 gallons. And just keep in mind, please, that the WPA for 2015 is going to be at 4.7. Everything rounds with the billing system, so it's going to essentially be at 5,000. But we are on a downward trend, which is a good thing. So, if anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
I confirm. I'm a little data obsessed. We looked at the data, ran mega processing out of the billing system. We are seeing a slight downward trend. I think it's a good thing. It's too early for me to declare victory for water conservation, but I'm real pleased, and I think that's where we're headed.
Good. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the status report for the Utilities Department. Any comments?
Two things. Lakes are at 56.4% today, so we're up a few percent. Typical of spring, very excited to have spring back. The meter sales are down from last year, but last year was a double average year for meter sales, so we're still tracking quite a bit ahead. And I could reference for you, also plan review processes remain at about twice previous years as they were last year. So things are rocking along in terms of new customers in a good way. And again, demand overall in the water system does seem to have attenuated a little bit, which I attribute to water conservation and the inclining block rates.
Marcia, with the rains we had last week, we were able to get some more water in both Atoka and McGee Creek.
Yeah.
They're creeping up a little bit, and the number that you've got listed is 41.44, which is what it was at the end of the month, is now up to 54.5.
Net total net total across the system is 54.5. Atoka and McGee Creek gained the most. They each gained about 2.5 feet in the reservoirs, 5,000 acre-feet apiece, I think. In the northwest reservoirs, we gained a little bit. It's maybe a couple of 100 acre-feet, but it's progress in the right direction.
And so we're hoping for some nice rains either on tonight and tomorrow or potentially, I guess, they're saying on the western part of the state later this week. So we'll see what happens.
It's spring and we're glad. So.
Any other comments or questions about the report? Next item is citizens to be heard. Are there citizens to be heard? Seeing none, we're adjourned.